In this video, we're going to go over dispenser error code C0030, or CDU Main Motor Failure. The reason why this error can occur is if something causes the dispenser to bind up and the mechanism can't spin over correctly, or if the dispenser loses its ability to sense how fast it's turning from its encoder sensor. Generally, this problem is the result of a jam or something else that can be fixed in the field, but let's go over the troubleshooting steps so we can tell. Begin by opening up the vault and sliding the dispenser out on its tray. Here, I've opened the vault door and now I'm going to slide the dispenser out. I've removed the screws located here or here so that the tray can slide out and allow us to view the dispenser. In this example, you're looking at an CDU dispenser or a 1K, since it's our most popular combination. What we're going to do is look down here where the belts are, and we're looking for anything, a dispenser jam, some bills wrapped up, or a belt off one of these pulleys. Turn this blue wheel over clockwise, which spins the belts in the direction that would be spun if the dispenser was about to dispense notes. Look for anything keeping the belts from being parallel, as well as look back here to see if any belts are off of their pulleys or anything causing a binding. It's normal for there to be some resistance when you turn the dispenser over just because of the mechanism in the belts. However, it shouldn't stop or become excessively hard at any point during the travel. Remove the cash box and continue turning the belts over and check to make sure that there's no jam down in the lower belts. If you're working with the CDU or the 2K, larger 2K cassette, slide out the dispenser and lift up the lid. Here we have two blue plastic wheels. In this case, the front wheel turns the sub-main motor, and the rear wheel, the larger wheel, turns the main motor. So turn this wheel clockwise to look for any type of binding. Also notice that the belts are parallel with each other and there doesn't appear to be any belt off. You can look towards the rear of the dispenser here, down in this section to verify that the belts are all on. And you can also remove the cash box and spin the belts over and make sure that the belts are on the pulleys down below and aren't binding up in any way. Once you have verified that there's not an obvious obstruction and that the mechanism turns over correctly, we want to try and initialize the dispenser and look for a different cause. Enter the operator function menu using your master or service password. Enter the ATM operator menu and then choose diagnostics, CDU, and initialize. If the dispenser starts to turn over and then stops, in this case it's doing it several times, but even if it just tries once and you can see the motor move a little bit and then the belt stop, then the problem is likely with the encoder sensor. The encoder sensor is located behind the blue plastic wheel and is this small black U-shaped sensor. As the dispenser turns, this pinwheel-shaped wheel or encoder wheel spins between this and allows the dispenser to measure how fast it's turning in RPMs. If the encoder sensor is broken and can't tell how fast it's turning, then it's going to make those short movements and then stop. With some models of dispenser, the encoder sensor has a connector located not far from it. To reseat it, you can unplug this connector and then just simply plug it back in, and then test it again to see if it works. With this newer model CDU dispenser, the encoder sensor goes back to the dispenser control board. Here I've loosened the 4 screws that hold this dispenser cover in place, and I'm going to remove it. And now we can follow this encoder sensor back to the control board and see where it's plugged in here. We're going to want to do the same thing. Pinch the cable so that you can unplug it, and then push it back into the socket until it clicks in place. Now that I've reseated that encoder sensor, I'm going to test the dispenser again by pressing initialize in diagnostics. And now the dispenser is working correctly again. With larger dispensers or with more complex dispensers like the presenter models, there's going to be a secondary motor which drives another part of the dispenser. With this CDU, the smaller wheel is controlling these small belts up front. This is what's called a sub-main motor. And so if you see a C0031, this is the motor that it's referring to, the motor that's driving this small group of belts in the front. But all the same things apply, either the encoder sensor or something binding up the belts. If reseating the encoder sensor cable connection did not solve the problem, then the encoder sensor itself may be bad. To replace the encoder sensor, you're going to remove this blue plastic wheel. There's a single screw behind it, and you can slide the wheel off. And then there are 2 Phillips screws that hold the encoder sensor in place. Just reconnect the cable and add the new sensor. Once you've checked the dispenser to make sure mechanically it's not binding, or there's nothing jammed that's not allowing the mechanism to turn over, and you've checked the encoder sensor and tried reseating the cable or even replaced it, and that still doesn't solve the problem, the next most likely thing to check is the dispenser control board. You can check the power connections to verify that it's getting good power, but replacing it with another one is, for most people, the most likely course of action. If you're comfortable using a voltmeter, you can measure voltage to verify that the dispenser control board is getting the right amount of power. The orange wires should be 24 volts DC, and the red wire should be 5 volts DC. Finally, once we've checked over all the other items, the last thing we would want to look at is the motor, which is this part here. Although the code is called a motor failure, it's very rare that the motor is the actual cause. Check to see that the motor will spin over. Sometimes when these motors go bad, as infrequent as that is, the motor will lock up inside and you won't be able to turn it. It won't move at all. That said, if you've checked for any kind of jams and binding in the mechanism, you've checked the encoder sensor and or replaced it, you've checked the control board and replaced it, and that's still not solving the problem, that dispenser motor would be the last thing to try. In this video, we've gone over the most common causes and troubleshooting for C0030 or CDU Main Motor Failure. Although we only demonstrated 2 specific models of dispenser, remember that the principles apply to all of our cache dispensers. Check and make sure that the dispenser turns over correctly and that the mechanism turns freely. Check the encoder sensor and reseat the connection as necessary, and then replace parts if those don't help. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, please contact Genmega support.